Yeah. All right.
All right. Hey, so welcome to Mormon Book Reviews, where an evangelical encounters the restoration. I am your host, Stephen Pynakker, and we're doing a special dual streaming on both Mormon Book Reviews. This is the fourth Friday in a row that we have gone live on my channel. We typically do it at 6 p.m. Mountain Time, but I'm going a little earlier, which is my traditional time, 4 p.m., just because it makes it a little easier for us to coordinate. I am an evangelical Christian. For those of you who are watching this on this other very unique, interesting channel that we're going to talk about in this few seconds here. But I was recently a guest on this fantastic, interesting, esoteric-esque type kind of program. This gentleman here is a Latter-day Saint, Andres of the Andreas Xirtus. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. YouTube channel program.
Xirtus, but yeah, pretty close.
Xirtus. Welcome.
I like the Xerxes thing though, because that's like very close to Xerxes, and like then you could be like the leader of the ancient world. But how are you?
Well, I'm doing great, and I want to thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to try doing something a little different on my channel. And folks, just so I know, my audience knows that this is a little bit different for my channel. And this is a little bit different of a guest. And one of the main reasons I wanted Andres to come on my program is I was recently a guest on his program earlier this week, and I was going to post it on my channel, but I almost thought, I need to prepare my audience for this Mormon time traveler, as he likes to be called. And that's, and I have to tell you, Andres, I was kind of going, I had a kind of a rough weekend. I was going through some stuff, and people were kind of criticizing me. And sometimes, I bring it on myself. So I'm a big boy, right? but I'm fielding these I'm having intense telephone call conversations. I'm getting I'm getting swamped by a bunch of people as they're kind of piling on. And then I hear from Andres. There's a Mormon time traveler. And I thought, oh, thank you so much. Thank you. I needed to talk to a Mormon time traveler, and I needed to go on a Mormon time traveler's program. And I wanted to share them with my audience as well. Now, obviously, it was really a fun episode I did with you. We actually talked about a lot of kind of esoteric things like Freemasonry and Joseph Smith and the role that Freemasonry played on early and late Mormonism. And then just kind of seeing where it's going and how it's evolved. We talked about a lot of interesting things about the city of Zion and where the Adam onto Ammon and the potential locations of the Garden of Eden, perhaps even in Florida. And so it was just kind of a fun, kind of just speculative conversation. I do spend a lot of time talking about academic stuff. I have a lot of scholars on my program, and some of the top scholars of Mormonism, you name them, they've been on the program. But I also feel it's really important sometimes to be able to let down my hair a little bit and have some fun. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to have some fun today. And we're going to get to know Andres, who has this big YouTube channel. I guess, Andres, I want you to describe to me, besides just being a Mormon time traveler, what is your channel all about? And then actually, before we go there, let's talk about your return to faith in Mormonism. Because I guess from my understanding, you were raised Catholic, like something a couple decades ago, you converted to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And then about a year or so ago, you kind of found yourself back in the fold. Maybe talk about that story, and then we'll talk about your channel.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so my channel you can find in Andreas Xirtus, and it's not initially a Mormon book review time travel channel. It's more like you said about and I don't want to say conspiracy, but maybe like history, revised history, esoterics. I think a good word for it. Tartaria was a very important subject that I was able to get a lot of people interested in and about. And so that led to people knowing more about me. But I've always been interested in history and in science and spirituality. I wouldn't say like I have a conversion story. I have like an integration story over the years. And I wouldn't say also that I'm like your average anything. Time travel or is also kind of a stereotypical idea. I'm talking more from a logical point of view of how we are, literally every day going through time, and how we have this ability to exist both through our families in the ancient world and in the future. And so there's definitely something really amazing about life, in the same way that someone might look at their hand and say, wow, I'm able to manipulate my hand. I'm able to use my mind to levitate this. These are things that sound so much crazier than they really, or actually they sound simpler than they are. It's pretty amazing that we can do all those things. So my integration religious story is basically just that I've always believed in God and heard, the spirit but I've also believed in math and science, and so I've always had a hard time understanding why people would debate. I remember seeing like the Ken Ham versus the Bill Nye debate and thinking,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, like this is what a Christian is, this is what a scientist is, because I knew like Jesuit Catholic astronomers and mathematicians, so my understanding of God was a very, some people might even call it atheistic, because God becomes much larger than just a single parent who writes books. So I was never in that camp to begin with. And as time went on, the Latter-day Saints seemed to be the most open-minded. My dad was really interested in me seeing different churches. I'm not saying they're the most open-minded like now, or I'm just saying, but as a kid, when I was going to the church, I saw that this was open to Gnosticism. And I'd gone to a bunch of different churches. I went to the Catholic Church, but I also visited Protestant, evangelical, Bible, these Bible churches, the big Bible, Santa Cruz Bible Church, and skateboard parks and things. I was like, wow, VeggieTales, and these are amazing. So I was always interested in that, but they weren't open to new scripture or to new ideas. And I found it like was really difficult to trust in the message, because I remember going to a church that had a skateboard park, and every week for 6 to 8 weeks, it was just, we're going to talk about what's wrong with this other religion and that other religion. And when I got to Mormonism, I was like, wait, for the last 5 or 6 weeks, you've been talking about Buddhism and Hinduism, and everything you said, I believe, but now I know you're lying because you don't know anything about Mormonism. And I've been to that building. And so it made me start to realize that everyone had a flavor of truth. We might not all be going to the same place, but we probably come from the same source, right? And so it becomes really important to start to integrate that message. And I've always thought, how could we be more like Jesus would be a good thing. I think most atheists probably would agree with that. So it becomes a thing where we're trying to become the best people we can be. And I think there's a bigger division actually between Christians and atheists, because a lot of atheists could agree with at least some Christians that we should be like the best people we can be and help each other. But not everyone feels that way within Christianity. There's become a flavor of Christianity, which is this idea of sacrificing a Godhead for your own, like blood sacrifice for your own immortality. And I'm worried about that. I think that particular strain of Pauline ideology is dangerous towards the end goal of Christ, which is karmic alleviation, is a jubilee. This idea of, I'm no longer going to push on the karma that's been I've had traumatized onto me. Let's say you're growing up in a horrible world. Stop it. Don't go out and make the world more horrible. That is
I think that's a valid criticism, because I look at it, and I brought this up about how people who are Calvinists believe basically everything's predestined and there's nothing you can do about it. And he's already determined who's going to heaven and who's going to hell. And then what's so ironic is that they'll attack me. And I'm thinking to myself, well, why are you attacking? Because obviously I'm doing something I was predestined to do anyhow. So I had no say in the matter. And then my other idea is that because in this little narrow world that basically has condemned like 90 to 95%, if not more, of humanity to eternal damnation and torture, that I would think, if I really believe that, I would learn to develop empathy for these people, that I know what's facing them, and why in the hell would I want to make this world hell on earth for them when I know they're heading for eternal damnation? So it shows a lack of human empathy as well that informs this thing. They think this is a good thing, and I'm like, this ain't good at all. And when they talk about the Bible, this is the good news, I'm like, this ain't good news. And that's kind of how I see it. So I really think we have to really reevaluate how we teach religion to kids. I went on Mormon Stories with John DeLynn, and one of the first things I said was, I believe that telling children that they better get saved because they're going to be burning in hell is child abuse. Okay.
Yeah.
So I think that there's a lot of that's going on in these churches, is degrees of that. And we literally have these groups who literally will go on stage and have conversations and literally say, yeah, oh, that person's going to hell. Oh yeah, that person's going to hell. I'm like, you don't have that. That's beyond your pay grade, homie. You should never in a million years should you be going and telling people who you think is going to hell and who isn't going to hell. It's just insane.
Judgment's dangerous. It's really a dangerous game to play, you know?
Yes, it is. It is. And Andres, I'm sorry, I'm going to step off my soapbox now and let you continue.
No, that's cool.
I want you just to talk a little bit more about, because this is an evangelical program, and I do issue critiques. Of course, we all know I offer critiques to everybody. I don't pick on just one group. Everybody. Please get that through your heads, okay? Andres, what was your experience overall engaging like
with
Bible, evangelical type?
Okay, overall is different, because first impression was incredible. Like, you have to understand, going to a Catholic church as a kid, and I did the whole 9. You know, if my family were very, very Catholic, and they used to build like cathedrals for Spain. You know, they're that kind of very Catholic. So it kind of bothers them that I don't want to be super Catholic. But I would just put the hood over my head and tie it shut and put my hands in my sweater. My brother like would say things like, he's like, I don't want to be closer to that priest. Later, come find out that like that church was having molestation issues, and we were the only 2 kids who basically didn't get molested, because I think my dad drove fear into the heart of this guy. So we had a lot of like worries at the Catholic church at that time. Granted, now things are like better, but to an extent, but that was a pretty bad period. I spent the night at a friend's house who was, you know, really one of my best friends. His parents were police officers in you know, they were like on the level, and my parents thought, okay, that guy's probably safe. But it was a Saturday, so then the Sunday I go to church with them, and I go in, and there's a skateboard park, and there's little girls painting their fingernails, and I'm just like, what is this? And then all of a sudden there's this big screen, and VeggieTales is playing, and you have to understand what VeggieTales was like when it first came out. Was just pinnacle. I still love VeggieTales to this day. I mean, it's incredible. I have a Larry t-shirt, you know, but then that was just the flavor, like du jour, you know, like this episode of the show before the thing starts. It hasn't started yet. Now it starts. There's a puppet show. Yes, a puppet show. And people interacting with, I mean, like, this is to me, as I remember it, this was Sesame Street grade level, high production values stuff. And there was a letter that goes on a wire across the room, and then the lady reads it with the puppet. It was like very impressive. And then there was the Awanas and the Boy Scout kind of thing. So they had me memorize Bible verses, and I thought that was all awesome. There were just some weird things going on. Like, I went one Sunday, and it turned out to be Super Bowl Sunday, and there was no church service. It was just a giant Super Bowl party, and they were projecting football. I thought that was strange. And then there was a lot of like adultery that was going on. Eventually, like, the entire community around that church got in trouble, like all the ministers and things, because they were having affairs with him and her and things like that. Around the time that I ended up leaving, I ended up leaving the church around the time that I'd visited the Mormons, and then had heard them just starting to lambast all these other religions. And, you know, that's also when you're going into puberty. And so you're thinking like rebellion. So I'm going to rebel against the church. But I just felt like with the evangelicals, and granted, I think everyone should be kind of an evangelical. My main concern are people kind of like the John Allen Chau guy who went to the Sentinel Islands and wanted to convert, you know. He's like, there's one more place without they haven't heard of Jesus. I'm gonna bring them Jesus. You know, I really worry about that kind of logic. And I kind of assume that maybe we don't need to know the name Jesus, which wasn't Yeshua's name anyway, in order to be doing what Yeshua was taught to do. And I'm not saying that the people in the Sentinel Islands are perfect, indigenous, natural, native, subconscious Christians, right? But I mean, I don't know if we really need to be spreading the name of Jesus as much as we need to be spreading the message of Jesus. I mean, I think Yeshua is really important, and we should all, the benefits outweigh anything to know about how to live like a perfect life. But
and just so you know, the image you just showed up, that was a guy that went to an island that has basically been untouched by the modern world, and he was an evangelical Christian. They wanted to convert them, and they ended up killing him, which is what they do whenever they see anybody come that's not of their tribe, of their community, they get killed. And I actually honestly, when you consider the legacy of colonialism, I think I'm not saying it was all bad. I think were some benefits. I'm not like an anti-colonialist, but we do see that there was a lot of bad that came. And sometimes I wonder if there was a little bit more resistance like that, it would have probably been better all around. Because, and again, these are people that they're basically Stone Age. They're like our ancestors in many ways. So it's a real important thing that I almost feel like they exist as a reminder of where we came from.
Right. You mean
And
like Eden, because
yeah,
that's what we talk about. And when we talk about the past, this Babylonian version of the past is that it was horrible and that it's better now. But like the biblical version of the past is that it was perfect and now it's almost unbearable because of civilization and civility. So Eden, that idea of that there are some places left in the world that are completely natural that are working fine. And granted, there's chaos in the jungle. Like the jungle will eat you, it'll steal your hubcaps. But the idea of these Sentinel Islanders, think of it more like if it was you. If it's at your home and all of a sudden a group fly into your backyard, and then they say, we're in their language that we're going to convert you to Islam or Buddhism or, Wicca, like what would you do, if any of that were to happen to you? And not just that, these are people who've never had anyone before. So they end up interacting with diseases like this. So they don't want to get sick.
right.
So that's a bigger thing than anything. When they see this guy, they're like, get away from us, and everyone's like, did they eat him? No, like they just pushed his body out to sea. They did not want him to be there. Right. I think that's the kind of the thing that might be an example of where in nature we might have we might be closer to God than we are in Babylon.
Yeah, that's a interesting way to look at it. And again, too, it's like I think that God knows who his children are, and I think sometimes these overzealous people think, I got to save him, I got to save him. The second you say, I got to do this, then I don't know if you're doing his work, but you're actually servicing your ego.
Yeah.
And I think
He
that's
just couldn't be. He had to be the one to save him, right? That was his love in life. Yeah, I think ego death is more important than anything. It sounds like such a horrible thing to so many people, but being able to have ego death is part of the thing that helps you realize that you're just dirt God breathed, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, that's a great way to. And I do think I did have experience in ego death, and I feel that that's what made me into a new creature. I thought I had deconstructed. I thought I had deconstructed the scriptures. I thought I had deconstructed God as an atheist, but turns out God deconstructed me. And that's kind of how I look at the journey that I'm on.
I think that's exactly right. I think that's exactly right. Ego death and born again are connected concepts. And I don't think everyone gets that because I remember how excited people get to be baptized on big screen in front of a bunch of people. I'm not saying like every religious group is like that or that that's necessarily wrong. Like to celebrate all these things can be good. But yeah, ego is really big in Christianity because the idea of being like God, it's too tempting. If you're trying to be like God, then you're going to have more power and then power will corrupt you. And trying to be used by God, be as emptied of your own intention as possible so that you can just surf on God. That's a completely opposite kind of mystic versus magic.
Okay, I think it's fascinating. First of all, I wanted to thank you for saying kind words about your positive experiences you had in the evangelical world. I think that there were reasons why you've chosen not to go that direction and why you don't feel that that's the world you want to inhabit. But I'm glad that you did have positive experiences and maybe you did get something out of it. So I want to thank you for saying nice words about my people.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say I wouldn't want to inhabit that world exactly. Okay. I think that my only concern is the idea of sola scriptura and of maybe the idea that things are locked. And I think there's some issues to sola scriptura, but I think it comes out of a logical place. I can respect the history of Christianity. I can see how Lutheranism is a necessary step in a literary academic level of Christianity. And beyond that, we need to have more steps away and into apostasy so that people can make their own decisions. And church really should be a community. I think I would describe my understanding of Christianity as something a lot more similar to an evangelical's understanding. I think that the first Christians working together, let's say you have a small group and you're kind of private about your beliefs. You're just trying to help people all the time because you're living in a world that doesn't accept you, right? This is early Christianity. and maybe
Sure.
20, 10 guys, 5 guys, 20 or less are meeting every once in a while, and they're praying with each other. And one of them has trouble getting food or a house, and they start to contribute a little bit to make sure that that person, I mean, this is the earliest version of Christianity. And even beyond that, Jesus is hanging out with his friends. He's feeding each other. And there's this debt forgiveness, again, that Jubilee idea. People can feel like after Jesus' death, people like Paul talk about the blood sacrifice of Jesus. But during Jesus' life, he talks about Jubilee, this idea of debt forgiveness without sacrifice, without scapegoats. And so we really need to probably emulate that earliest time more. But I think the evangelicals in the early 21st century, we're trying to do that. I remember churches that were trying to have more and more Bible study small groups. So I think there's a lot of effort that went into trying to live more like Christ's life, and people should emulate that about the evangelicals. Of course, Pentecostal Christianity can get to a point where you're relying too much, I think, in just your own small milieu, and it's probably useful to get more information. I've had a hard time meeting evangelicals that are super open-minded to other pre-flood interpretations of God, right? I think that can be a thing, and I find that interesting. I think the Mormon thing is interesting, that there are Christians that believe you can murder and rape and become, a serial killer, but you'll be forgiven. Just don't be Mormon.
Okay, that's an interesting way of looking at it. I want to thank you so much for bringing that to the table. Now, of course, some of the stuff you're saying about Paul would not be viewed very positively. And I think this is the thing about what we need to understand about the appeal of Mormonism, is that young Joseph, I tell people, and I've told this to many people, and I was talking to somebody about it on the phone yesterday. I said, in order to understand Mormonism, you need to understand Joseph Smith. And if all you do is inhabit a very literalistic, Manchian, black and white world, and you don't have an imagination, you won't be able to understand Joseph Smith, because Joseph Smith had an imagination. So if you want to tap into what Joseph Smith tapped into, you need to have an imagination. And the problem is that many of these people don't have an imagination. Therefore, they don't understand Joseph Smith. Therefore, they don't understand Mormonism. And I also think they don't understand the young people who are inquisitive, who don't settle for the answers that were given to them from the pulpit. And the ministers giving them answers that are not like, wait, no, that doesn't make any sense. And keep on asking questions. And after a while, they're told, you know what, don't ask anymore, or they'll just be kind of shunted to the side as maybe a troublemaker. And I think what Mormonism does is it appeals to that young person who's looking for more answers, like what really happens after we die? What happened before we were born? All these different questions. What's the purpose of life? How did all these things happen? How did those Indian mounds end up there? Right? All those kind of questions, and so what Mormonism did was Joseph Smith asked a lot of those same questions. And because he had an imagination, which is greatly attested to, as a young boy, would tell stories, regaling them about the history of the peoples that walked these lands. And that was what he was able to tap in, was an imagination. And I think once you have that, you can understand. I think you can also tap into the same thing that Joseph Smith was tapped into. Maybe talk about how Mormonism would appeal to somebody like you who's doesn't want to be put in a box, and everything has to be literal and black and white. That you want to be able to push the boundaries and really expand the search for knowledge and understanding and ultimately wisdom.
I mean, obviously, there's some historical things about the church's growth through time, and I think it's probably useful to think of all of Christianity and how it's changing. But when Mormonism first emerged, you have to imagine how different it is from what it is now. So a lot of people you have got an audience who knows this more, but many people think Mormonism today is still Brigham Young-ism. They think that it's polygamy, and basically it's amazing how much of an impact on the reputation of Mormonism Brigham Young has made, because no one seems to know much about, from the outside, the layman, what Joseph Smith was teaching, which was abolitionism. I mean, the guy was running for president to free the slaves. He was going to purchase the slaves with the congressional funds,
right,
and liberate them so that they'd be free people, we the people. I mean, this is a hugely different character and the
A
building
time
of
traveler, a man beyond his time, a man who
right.
who predates he's right. Like you admit, we talked about this and when I was on your program, who really kind of was a trailblazer,
Yeah.
a John the Baptist, if you will, of Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah. And I would say, I love John the Baptist because John the Baptist is a wild man. I think of John the Baptist with dreadlocks and smelling like Qui-Gon Jinn from Star Wars. He's probably lived pretty hard and eating honey fried locusts. There's something about Joseph Smith that we don't respect there. He used to be really into wrestling. He's a super strong guy. And also, charismatic. Yeah, look at that, right? Look at that guy. That's
man.
That's a dude who would throw you down on the ground,
Absolutely. That man, you wouldn't want to mess with that man. I mean, I'd be like, if I saw him walking down the street, I'm like, I either got to be friends with him or I need to go to the other side of the street.
Yeah, right. But I mean, if you think about the that period in American history, and like you said, like a time traveler, even on a very simple level, moments in time where lots of people live and die and everything changes like that, like such a huge change in American history and in the world, because up to that point we still have, and even the Calvinists I think still are under this, unfortunately to an extent, crusader mentality, because you've got this post Spanish Inquisition period and there had been oppression of the Christians, and so now the Christians became the secular state. And when anything is a secular state, whenever it's the voice of power, it can have air of corruption. And so I would say Christianity during the Crusader period, I think we can kind of agree, like in the Dark Ages, Christianity was without habeas corpus, arresting, torturing, and sometimes killing and eating people, right? Like horrible things were happening behind closed doors. So the idea that Joseph Smith it could only happen in America during this kind of Freemasonic Protestant period, that we could re-examine what Christ had said. During the Crusades, people weren't allowed to read the Bible unless you had like a license to speak the language of the church. And so instead, very few people could talk about what Jesus did with his life. And when you get to which book, because it wasn't Pope Gregory's Bible, you have different stories. He's a superhero who flies through the harrowing of hell, like in the Gospel of Nicodemus. He has a donkey head in one version, and St. Christopher has a dog head in another. These are like comic books. Everyone has a different interpretation of Christianity at that time. It isn't until Erasmus that we start to really focus on the human Jesus, right? And so when we start reading into Jesus and seeing what he says, it's not saying you're going to die and serve a Lord for the rest of time, which is what Crusaders were doing. They're going around and they're saying, you're going to die and you're going to serve me. And when you think you're just because you believe it, you think you're going to get to be a Lord in heaven. That's not how that works. You're going to serve lords, and it becomes a psychological thing that we're going to constantly be serving lords in heaven. But the Bible doesn't say that. Jesus doesn't say that, right? Yeshua talks about, even Paul, I think, talks about this idea of the new creature, which is where we get this idea of born again, and that you are a co-heir in Christ, right? Because Jesus' name, again, isn't even Christ. It's not Jesus Christ. Yeshua of Nazareth isn't Jesus, but it's a title. I can get behind that title. And the Christ title is maybe almost a corporation, because we're all cooperating together to make this Christ consciousness, to make this world a better place. Mormonism kind of offered that at the very beginning. You got to understand, like, again, Brighamism and dudes in suits in the 50s. Okay. But in the beginning there, can you show me another example of that? Can you find like a Rosicrucian church that was publicly saying, this is the thing. This is at a time when everything was secret and you couldn't tell people things, and people would kill you in the streets, tar and feather you in the streets. Can you find another example where someone's saying you're going to be a co-heir of Christ, working with Christ? Who else is quoting that scripture? And I just find that to be a huge part of it. And I feel like the rest of Christianity we really have to find out what Yeshua was trying to do, because otherwise the whole death is I don't want to say it's for nothing, but imagine if you're not forgiven by a blood sacrifice, and it's more that you have to figure out what Jesus lived for, right? Imagine if it's not that God's plan to murder his son. It was God's plan for his son to live. Then we'd be in a really bad bind, right? So it'd be worth considering at very least, like how much of the things that Christians have been teaching afterwards have nothing to do with what Yeshua was trying to have us do with our lives.
It's an interesting take. And I'm glad for you to share your perspective on this, because obviously it doesn't fit in with conventional or Orthodox Christianity, which of course neither did Joseph Smith. I do think it is telling when you think about the Catholic world that Protestantism came out of. They would have these huge cathedrals that were so massive that it made you feel like you were just this insignificant little ant. And they were meant to do that, to make you feel like you're an insignificant. Then you have this idea of now in some strains of Protestantism that, well, basically God's damned, like made all these people, but most of them are going to go and suffer eternal damnation, and they're predestined for it, and there's nothing they can do.
It sounds very Darwinian, doesn't it?
Yeah,
like
yeah.
It's like sink or swim, and like not everyone's gonna make it.
And it doesn't matter because the race is fixed anyhow. It's already been determined who the winners are going to be anyhow. So imagine a young Joseph Smith is engaging these types of Christianities and thinks none of this makes sense unless we have to look at take a different approach on how we view things. So I think that what the Restoration does and what Joseph Smith does is it posits certain things that kind of goes and says, listen, we're going to push back against the dominant narrative, which is, and I'm always, look, if anybody throughout history, anybody who pushes up against the dominant narrative automatically is a saint in my book. Okay. Just so you know, but I think that was a really important thing. And see, one of the things I don't think a lot of evangelicals understand to this day is that it was really the idea that this Presbyterian minister went to the Smith family and said, Alvin Smith, Joseph Smith's older brother, who was a keen supporter of Joseph, he was supposed to be accompanying him every year to Cumorah to engage the plates, and his life was cut short. Okay. And this Presbyterian minister says, because he didn't get baptized in our church, he is burning in hell.
What?
Yes. And so that, to me, is what put Joseph Smith on the trajectory to find a way to get his brother Alvin into heaven.
Yeah.
And in a certain way, he did.
Right.
And I think that's what we have to understand, is that if these same Presbyterian ministers exist to this day, some even attacking me, because I am basically just trying to ask questions and push back against the narrative and challenge them. And rather than them want to talk to me, they'd rather just attack me, which is okay. I guess that's how it's going to be, because I don't think that Presbyterian minister, as a matter of fact, I think I read later that he was actually involved in tarring and feathering Joseph Smith. Perhaps I think that might have been
really interesting.
No, I'll take that back. I need to take that one back. I gotta be fair. I might be conflating him with another minister, so strike that from the record. I want to be fair to history. But there were Christian ministers that did persecute Joseph Smith. Right. There's no question, and they were involved in the mobs and stuff like that went after Joseph throughout the history of his life. So that's the thing, Joseph Smith challenged these ideas that, one, you're insignificant, you're nothing. And really, that's what a lot of Calvinists believe too. You're insignificant and nothing without God. And you're just, by the luck of the draw, you are one of his elect. And that's it. I think I can understand why there'd be a young Joseph Smith would have a lot of questions in his head about where his brother was going in the afterlife and what our role as humans are to play in a role with the Creator. Are we just little peons? Are we going to play a role? And I think you can understand the Bible makes it clear that we are image bearers created in His image, and that we do have the divine in us. And so I think it's really difficult for me to understand a concept that essentially God would create a world in which He's already condemned before they were even born, a vast majority of them to eternal damnation. That doesn't jive with me either. It didn't jive with Joseph, and it doesn't jive with me.
Right. It doesn't seem to make it doesn't make mathematical sense. If you think about structure and entropy, the idea that things are both the material form and they're the divine principle that underlies that. Well, we see the material form disintegrate, but mainly because the material form doesn't align with the divine principle. If something is outside of the structure that nature makes it's supposed to be, which again, divine principles are like straight lines and curves and geometry. We don't have a perfectly straight ruler, but we have this idea of straight lines. We have this idea of, four, or I. So we those were probably the only things that really exist in a weird sense, divine principles, because they're permanent. Everything material will never be exactly right, and it'll not last forever, but it's clearly made up of energy. That's the other thing. And I have a harder and harder time dealing with that lack of understanding today, because we have enough science out there that can do experiments. It's not just CERN, but we can see that that matter is energy moving at a speed slow enough to be seen. Matter is light moving at a speed slow enough to be seen. And so everything is itself. There's no way for it not to have some form of energy. So that kind of calls out nihilism. I feel like nihilism is one that's kind of broken by that logic. The other one, though, is just the idea that God has to be so if something works in nature, we see that pattern repeated in all sorts of other places. If a butterfly does this, then a spider does that. If a horse does this, then the trees do that. Every pattern, even the way DNA works and the way certain kinds of rocks, the stoichiometry works together, we find those patterns over and over and over again. So if we see something working, we're going to see it again. I think that's another reason why it's hard to believe that just there's going to be one succeeder. There's going to be one 144,000 that make it in all of space time, and everyone else is doomed. And it's also that weird handshake kind of idea that, like, you have to know Jesus. You have to know this. It's not that you don't just know who he is or what he did. You have to know his secret name, Jesus, not his real name, right? These kinds of things are very strange to me. It doesn't make any sense. I think if you looked at it and you found people doing exactly the thing that Jesus taught them to do, what would that Presbyterian minister say about them if they hadn't heard of Jesus yet, right? If these, let's say on the Sentinel Islands, there's a bunch of, they're actually feeding the poor, taking care of the sick, and loving their neighbors and forgiving them. Let's say they're doing all of those things and they've never heard of Jesus. Is a Presbyterian minister going to say that those people are going to hell versus a group of Christians who believe in Jesus, but they're constantly hurting each other?
Right. Well, that's great. That's a great point. And I think that Presbyterian minister in the 19th century would say they're all burning in hell, and their modern precedents, the modern forerunners that come out of that stream of Presbyterianism would also agree that all those people are condemned for eternal damnation. That's what they believe. And I think it's really sad. But, I want to get back to a little bit more about your story, because what happens is, so you decide, because from my understanding, as you've told me, is that you decided to become a Latter-day Saint. And so talk about what made you decide to become a Latter-day Saint. And then apparently you were inactive for like 20 years. And then about a year ago, you got reactivated into the church. Talk about that story.
Yeah. So it was about 2003, I think, when I started going to the church, and I got more and more interested, and I met a lot of these members of the missionaries and everything. And it was just really fascinating to find out about, while I'd also been taking lessons in Sanskrit and learning about Hinduism and the Veda. And so I had probably an understanding of metaphysics from this like Eastern understanding of metaphysics. Wow, this is really interesting that there's a form of Christianity that seems to understand some of those rules. And a big part of it also is you're called on to be a saint. You're called on to perform and receive miracles from God, right? And it's interesting because it changes your lifestyle. You see I knew a bunch of Boy Scouts who were Mormons, so I was very impressed with their discipline level. It seemed like the most disciplined of the Boy Scouts at that time. So that was really interesting to me. There were, obviously every church is going to have issues. I think that one time a bunch of missionaries came over to my house and I was burning DVDs and I was watching Jesus Christ Superstar. And this is like years before that was super common. So they were surprised by my Silicon Valley-ness. And I'd never met, these kinds of people before. And they were very surprised by Jesus Christ Superstar. They're seeing guys in purple tank tops holding machine guns in the 70s. And it's this play, Andrew Lloyd Webber musical about Jesus. And they're saying, like, there's no machine guns at that time. And I'm like, dude, you guys don't want to be the ones talking about anachronisms in the biblical period right now, please. But I found I was like, you got to read between the lines, like try to pick up on a lot of the metaphor. And I felt like it was a really great community, but there was just once I realized, like, I'm not going to be wearing white shirts anymore for like 10 or 20 years. Like, I could just tell, like, it's going to be until I have to, like, when I go back to work, I'll start doing that, but I'm not going to want to do that. And I was noticing that there was a big change that was coming. I think a big thing about religion is designed to safeguard against change. and you can also use it to change things rapidly. So Joseph Smith's changing things super rapidly in his lifetime. But today, if someone's wearing a suit, you're like, wow, are you working at a museum or like in a cosplay? Like, you don't see people wearing suits unless they're Mormon, right? It's become a uniform. So I find that I found that to be difficult for a while. And I like suits now, and I like the tie is a Croatian historical invention. As a Croatian, I'm pro tie, but I think that most people look at the Mormon church as antiquated at this point. And if you're young, that was a big issue. I think also I found is that it felt like it was so trapped in a sense, and that it was also having the same issues. Even now, like at the time, it was like dare to be a Mormon. Now it's like they don't use the word, the LDS Church itself, the Intellectual Reserve. They don't use the word Mormon anymore. They have kind of an identity crisis about Joseph Smith versus Brigham Young. Luckily, I think I'm seeing, because of the internet and communication, and I think Protestantism, because the YouTube Protestant community and the American Protestant community, which made Mormonism possible, have made it possible for Mormons to converse and argue, to have dialectic. And that wasn't something going on 40, 50 years ago. People like Bruce McConkie weren't allowed. You know, if you were in Utah, it was like isolated, right? And so now you don't have to worry about that as much. I would even say John DeLynn is probably helping Mormonism. Yeah, I said it. Because in a sense, people being able to talk about things and argue about things and not just hearing it from one source makes it more of a dialogue and makes it more shared of an image. When I got to be more and more on like a spiritual path of my own, I felt like I had to be separate from the church, because I didn't think that I didn't know yet what I agreed with and what I didn't agree with. But in the last couple of years, I've been talking more and more with people about like Tartaria. And so that's another thing I find interesting, is just all of the historical evidence for the part that seems like the most incredible. Like if Joseph Smith had just written like Swedenborg, a philosophical book, told people to love each other and died, and then people, he would have been happy. That's not what's going on. This is really like asserting some really incredible claims without credibility, unless you find that. I mean, at that time, there's no pyramids found yet, and now we're finding we're finding these mounds and everything like that. They hadn't been to the Krigler Mountains yet, or the Hopewell Mountains yet. So it's just crazy to think about all of the information that came out. And then I became friends with Kwaku. I'd seen Kwaku on Ward Radio and talked to him a bunch, and he has a lot of similar interests in the esoteric and the heretical. I think heretical is once I realized I was a heretic. So with Catholicism, they're constantly telling you as a kid, like, you're a heathen or you're a heretic. Or I heard these things a lot. That's blasphemy. These are words thrown around a lot. But when I looked it up and found out that the word heretic just means school of thought, from the Greek heretikos, meaning the ability to choose for yourself. And I realized, wow, like they've turned this word to mean sodomy and Satanism. Like every word we have, we need to reinvestigate. Every concept we have, we need to find out the original intention. It's good to know the common misusage, but we should also know the original intention. And so I feel like that was a big reason I felt called back to look into extensions outside of just the regular Pentecostal.
Okay, so do you feel that because of people like Kwaku, who are kind of, and I think we talked about another guy who's like the Mormon Gnostic, who's got a YouTube channel. Do you feel that Mormonism allows for these ideas to be explored a little bit more than in other Christian traditions? And would you say that would be because you said you really like a lot about evangelicalism, but you maybe don't feel like there's room for you're the kind of person that you are and how you think and see the world in that movement, but you think maybe that the Mormon world is more accommodating to somebody like you?
I think there's a lot of levels there. On one hand, again, with the church doesn't call itself Mormon anymore. So it's kind of like they dropped that word and
Yeah,
it's ours now. Like
that's true.
we can do whatever we want with it, and we should be really respectful and good with it, but it's not their word anymore on purpose, And so I see on YouTube people using it to make it about Brighamism, and I wish people would stop doing that. I wish people would use that word to mean something cooler, and maybe to do with abolitionism but just something cooler than just the polygamy brigamist. We already have that,
Interesting way to look at it. Yeah, and I love the word Mormon. I mean, and part of the reason why, folks, I mean, for those of you who are watching on Andre's channel, my regular viewers are pretty familiar. I'm very familiar with what my purpose is and how I operate. But what I do is I try to not only talk to the main Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but I try to talk to all the different manifestations and sects and expressions of the restoration, which
exactly
restoration is a general term. Like you have Protestantism, Mormonism, and you have Restorationism. Those would be Protestantism, Restorationism, Catholicism. I put you guys like in a camp like that. and so I like to get all the other groups who believe that the Book of Mormon is their scriptures and that Joseph Smith is their founding prophet to talk to each other and have communication and civil dialogue. And I'm hopeful then to be able to broaden it out to get the Protestant evangelical world, which has traditionally been the enemies of the Restoration, to sit down and talk with the Restoration in a civil Christian way. Because I really don't, it doesn't make sense to me that 200 years after these bold, audacious claims were made about this ancient scripture that was found by this young, semi-literate farm boy, Mormonism's here to stay.
Right.
And it ain't going anywhere. And attempts have been made to destroy it for a very long time, and it ain't going to happen. And it's here to stay. So we, as evangelical Christians, need to learn to coexist at the very least.
But it is changing. Like, if there's any constant, change is constant. So we're learning more. The idea is that there could have been when people looked at Native Americans, a lot of people thought of them as savages. So this was the first time to even consider them not just like human, but like yourself, right? And this is the beginning of with integration, like Jungian integration. I think there's a lot of reasons why Mormonism in that respect is very useful for integration of different ideas and everything. But I like what you say about the restoration concept, because in general, that's all we're ever supposed to be trying to do is build Earth to be like Zion, so that it's kind of hard to tell the difference between, it's easier to pass between heaven and earth. Like it's, you want it to be as gradual of a process as possible. So that's what we're supposed to do. And we've gotten onto this concept of the brigamism protecting the intellectual reserve, that the church is the property of a corporation. I like that Protestantism is teaching, and that it's spreading into Mormonism, that you can be independently, call yourself what you are. You don't have to be accredited by the Church of Scientology. You can be your own thing. And Bickertonites, Alice Cooper, right? His father was supposed to be the prophet of the Bickertonites, I think. So there's a lot of really interesting people. I think that's the thing that people forget about America, and just how much it's affected by, like, I was playing the Oregon Trail recently, and it just blows my mind that the Oregon Trail on the north side of the river is the Mormon Trail. And when I was starting the game, I didn't remember this from school, where it starts in Independence, Missouri, and it's 1848 or something. It's right after, and it blows my mind how everything, the pinnacle of everything, is tied to this period in American history when, James Polk, he got Mexico during that election after Joseph Smith lost it. The Civil War, because of James Polk and what ended up happening in the antebellum. I think we might not have had a civil war without Joseph Smith, if Joseph Smith had been so it's just such a crazy time. It's such a crazy thing. I think we all should be experiencing it. We all own that, like the intellectual reserve doesn't own that. It's like Mickey Mouse. So I think that's another reason. I think a big thing I've seen people be concerned about is about just the main church. The main church is their enemy. On your channel, not your channel, but on John DeLyn's channel, like the arguments I've seen mostly have been about that one organization, right? And I feel like if we can learn how, and I'm seeing it happen more, where like Protestants, we can find out what we believe and we can just live that life together. It's not going to be nearly as much of an issue.
Oh, that's an interesting way to look at it. And a friend of mine, Jonathan Neville's, brought this up to me, and really it's food for thought. Is that he said, you got to remember that the Book of Mormon came forth before the church was organized, implying that the Book of Mormon is not just for any one group or church, but it's for the whole world. And also, I think it's important to realize that just because the biggest group is based in Utah doesn't mean that that invalidates the other expressions of the Restoration in what they bring to the table. And I also think that it enables to hear different engagements with the words of the prophet, with the doctrines and covenants, with the Book of Mormon, and even some have their own versions of the doctrines and covenants and all this kind of stuff. And they have there's a lot of interesting diversity of thought going on in the Restoration that I think often gets ignored. Fortunately, I'm able to talk to all these people and hear their stories and bring them to a larger audience. And I think that it's really important that, in the context of Zion, that I think in order for, I'm going to be speaking in April. And one of the things I'm going to talk about is the Restoration ready for Zion. And I don't think that it is, because it needs to get its act together. Now, I'm not telling people what to do. I'm just speaking as an outsider of how I would assess the situation. I also think that us Protestants need to get our act together too. And the Catholics need to get their act together. And a lot of humanity needs to get its act together before we're able to experience heaven here on earth. And I think that that's really the role that we're to play. And we're not just some chess pieces on a chessboard that's being controlled by God, but I think that we are active participants in the bringing forth the Zion, bringing forth the millennium. All these things I think we play a pivotal role in doing.
Maybe that is the real Trinity in a weird way, because you need, Catholicos means universal. So really, there's I would save that word. Universalism could be pretty good. It's being misused. I want it back. The other one is Protestant. Well, to be Protestant is, I'm pretty good with that. I actually like the idea of being Protestant. Maybe I like it too much even. So I'm going to keep that one too. I can be a Catholic Protestant. And yeah, Latter-day Saint. Well, I kind of believe that we're in the latter days. It's not just the new wave or the new age. It's the latter. I like that kind of idea that we're in the latter age. And a saint's just someone, again, who can perceive, receive, and perform or receive miracles. Miracles are just anomalies, right? There's so many different ways that a miracle could happen. Like you could see someone who's gonna die if you don't know it yet, but you tell them you love them, and all of a sudden that week they decide not to kill themselves. Like there's crazy kinds of miracles that people don't consider that we live through in terms of synchronicities. Stevens talked to me about a few examples in his life where he's just talking to someone and then someone else feels it essentially and reaches out to him. We're tied in these crazy ways, which, we could describe, we could explain that. Like it could be like Dawkins or something. I'm sure there's math. There's some Stephen Hawking's explanation why everything's that way. But that's cool. I'm good with that. I'm good with the idea that this is telekinesis. I'm able to use my mind to pick things up with, I think that we should be more accepting of the power of the subtle miracle, right? And that's the thing. If we can tie all these ideas together, then someone proved me wrong that building a world built out of love and out of tolerance and out of respect won't help. Even talking to atheist simulation theorists, I have friends who think that we might be living in a simulation, right? And they're professors.
It's a 50-50 proposition, I think, in many people's mind.
Mm-hmm. But you know how they want to test it. One way to test it would be to blow up the universe, because then we'd be able to know right away. But another way to test it would be to find out if it's a game, right? Maybe there's some sort of imperative or prime directive, maybe. And so if we were to alleviate suffering before we were to blow up the world, before we were to blow up the universe, we were to alleviate suffering, we would know so much. We would know whether or not it was a game. We would know whether or not that was the goal. We would have other things to worry about. So I feel like it's just so practical. Regardless of what we believe and what we argue about, can someone prove me wrong that we shouldn't make the world a better place and alleviate suffering? Because I think Jesus was right about that.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to look at it, Andres. Obviously you are an out-of-the-box thinker, even for a lot of Latter-day Saints. Obviously, especially for more conservative evangelicals, that you are as well. Now, I just want to kind of get back a little bit to what does your Latter-day Saint faith look like today? Are you active in your ward? what do you have callings? I'm just kind of curious about what your walk in this faith tradition looks like.
I mean, so I go to the ward, the Ocean Branch ward in Santa Cruz, and while I've not always been able to be, going to church for the last couple year or so, I also do watch the ward radio, and so I've been more and more a part of their like Discord group, which when I'm traveling has been really interesting. That this didn't exist before, that you could have an LDS kind of community that existed online, like a ward you could visit anywhere in the world at any time. So things I think are emerging that are making it more possible for people like me to adapt to that. But also, going to the Ocean Branch ward in Santa Cruz, and it's really interesting because of the community experiences that are available. One of the things I really like about the church is they do things throughout the week. Like you can get ice cream with your bishop. These kinds of things are really cool. And you have support. We played Dungeons and Dragons at one point, which I know a lot of evangelicals are not cool with, but I think we could make one that everyone's into. I mean, my version, we had these magical beavers that carried our gold back for us, right? And so you can make your imagination. That's another thing, I think, imagination, like the fact that they're willing to play games and do these imagination things that other people are afraid of using their imagination over. But yeah, there's also more of an interest, in my opinion, to, like you said, like connect people. I think a big part of my spiritual faith is having conversations with people that see things slightly differently. I mean, even if we agree on a lot of things, I'm able to see your perspective is different, and we're getting a more 3D representation together of God. Like wherever two are gathered in God's name, there am I, there's my church, right? So this becomes my church in a lot of ways. And the Mormon church is different than people understand it a lot, because there's temple endowments of power, which, those are practice you get to do those through, temple elect, but it's not the same as church. Church is more like a community. So in a lot of ways, I think the church experience people have in the Mormon church is kind of similar to the Protestant experience. Single story, the Baptists in the Midwest, single story buildings, people reading the Bible together. I mean, for the most part, if there's anything I've noticed, it's that there's been more Bible reading than Book of Mormon reading since I've been back, right? Like they've been pushing the Bible a lot more so as not to be seen as people who, don't read the Bible or something like that. And they know their scriptures. And it's really interesting how much of the Sunday is a educational lesson, because part of it is really just to read and learn the Bible together. So it's almost like school.
Fascinating. Well, I wanted to just touch on, I want to remind folks that next week I will be releasing on my channel sometime next week, not sure when. I wanted to do this as an introduction to Andreas, I'm going to say Xirtus, Andreas Xirtus YouTube channel. Matter of fact, Andres, I want you to pull up your YouTube channel again real quick here for the audience to see and talk about. So I want you to check out his channel, and it's a very esoteric channel that covers a lot of different interesting, weird, odd things. Which I think I say that in the best sense of the term. Like, look at this guy right here. Where's the dinosaur? The dinosaurs with the Nephilim,
right? Yeah.
Nephilim and Nephites with Dr. Longo. That's the kind of stuff you get there. Right now, of course, we're streaming our stuff, but you do talk about all different types of conspiracy theories. You touch on all of them, all the different speculations that are out there, all the different views of looking at the world, stuff like that. And again, some of the guests you've probably had on are a little controversial and everything like that. Of course, I have controversial guests on my program too. And like I tell people, I said, don't go to other YouTubers and tell them how to program their channel. Maybe I'll tell them, hey, you might want to take that one down because there's an issue going on here. But generally speaking, I always try to give total freedom, because that's that libertarian ethos that I have. And by the way, folks, just want to let you know, for the very first time, I actually had one of my videos pulled by the powers that be because of a conversation that my guest and I had that was deemed to not be acceptable, and that was kind of a weird thing. And then I'm freaking out because I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I'm having the Mormon time traveler who's this esoteric guy who deals with controversial subjects all the time. He's going to be live on my program, and I hope I don't get a strike for this, because I'm on a
I know, right? I feel like I really drive the fear into the hearts of men like that, but I swear I'm not that bad. I honestly, I swear.
So I wanted to, just bring out a little bit, because I think one of the things we talked about, and we have it in our titles, and it's about Masonry and Joseph Smith and early Mormonism. I just wanted you to, I mean, both of you and I have talked about it, and I want to talk about this too, is that, I mentioned this on our last interview about the book, A Method Infinite, Freemasonry and the Mormon Restoration. And actually, as a matter of fact, I'm going to be interviewing Cheryl Bruno and Nicholas Litursky, two of the three co-authors. And I was actually in communication with her. She's very excited to come on board. They're going to be making a special leather-bound edition of this, Greg Cofford Books, and they're going to send me a copy, and I'm going to promote it. I can only make 100 copies, and I'm going to promote it and have them come on the program. But I just wanted you to, I just thought, since we have Masonry in the title, I thought maybe we should touch on that a little bit. And of course, we did talk about a little bit about the Illuminati, about
and the Baptists. The Baptists in America are some of the most Masons in America are Baptists.
Yeah, exactly. So we have there's actually, what I find so ironic is that in the 19th century, I tell people I don't get all up and tight about Mormon temple ceremonies, because there are literally millions, probably millions more evangelicals at the time that were doing similar temple ceremonies contemporary to Joseph Smith.
Actually, one of the things that got me into Mormonism again was Africa. So like a lot of my friends from Africa, and I have some friends in Nigeria, and I have a friend, Alfred Albiza, who is a member of the Beni priesthood. He's like basically a witch doctor, but he's got an anthropology degree and a philosophy degree, up and up in Nigeria. But understanding the traditions of Africa, where they've just forever, they baptized their spirit, they baptized their living in the name of their dead ancestors. So a lot of these things just come as native knowledge around the world in places. And I found that really interesting. In terms of Solomon, though, right? The Masonry is referred to as the Moorish sciences. So there really is a connection to Africa, and that idea of alchemy and algebra is Hebrew, algebra, right? It has to do with the Kabbalah in a lot of ways, even though it's in Arabic, it's from a Jewish source. Alchemy is from Africa, Kemet. Kemet was the name of North Africa. So the study of Kemet, right? La and al is Arabic for the. So you have a number of these traditions, Hermeticism, that are emerging. And Solomon, it's really all about Solomon, Hiram Abiff, and building the temple, right? So the temple square and the idea of the Solomon magic seal, these are time travel, these are space-time ships, right? Because Solomon's using, according to the Bible, this isn't even from Book of Mormon or from Masonic sources, according to the Bible, Solomon's using demons, fallen angels that God has given him power over, in order to build the temple. And they're not supposed to use sound. It's in a place that's super silent. So there's also a lot of advanced antiquitech studies say this has to do with like sonication or some sort of sound technology. But a lot of the time we're talking about channeling. So Masonry has always been about the Solomonic magic and continuing the ability of commanding Solomonic magic. Now, there's two forms of Masonry. You could say, like, there's the good form and the bad form. People love good and bad. That's like their favorite way to break things up. I think it's more complicated. Masonry definitely helps people, because that's a big part of the goal, is to bring up the human condition. And you'll notice this from Masonry having, children's hospitals and things like that. People will also associate it with people that are in charge of small towns. And you can say, oh, wow, that little town there that's run by those Masons or something like that. I don't think that that's completely fair. Especially, it's interesting, the association with Mormonism, because Mormons were super against Freemasonry at first. Not every single one of them, but you have a bunch of anti-Masons, and you have issues with Masonry. Like Hiram Smith was a Mason, but because of the anti-Mason hysteria, he wasn't able to graduate from Moore's Academy at Dartmouth College. There's a lot of issues that emerged. So being quiet about Masonry was a good idea at that point. And Joseph Smith ends up married to Lucinda Pendleton Morgan, right? Which is the William Morgan affair. The anti-Masonry all starts in America, this hysteria, because of William Morgan. And then so for his wife, William Morgan's wife, to be married to Joseph Smith, shows that there's some interesting thing going on with both Masonry and anti-Masonry in the church. The Utah Lodge wasn't allowed to be incorporated for like 100 years. It wasn't until like 20 or 30 years after Brigham Young was dead. So there's definitely some connection there where the Masons and the Mormon Church had an issue for a period of time. Now, today you'll find a lot of great Mormon Masons. Not a lot, but there's some, and they'll tell you, you know, things are chill now. And for the most part, people who say that the Masons kill people, they don't get that it's, I mean, that's a really great PR thing. Like, if you want a group to look cool, make people think you kill people. Honestly, it's like Fight Club.
People, you rule the world. Well, you know, and I talked about this on our last episode. I run into this guy. He's a Mason. I took a bet. Can I take a picture of your jacket? Like, yeah, sure. I said, that's kind of cool. And it's Widow's Sons, Masonic Ra. And he's got his patches on there. He's with a motorcycle gang, you know, but they're Masons. And I turn around to go talk to him, and he's got a cross. He's wearing a cross, and it says chaplain. And I'm like, you're a chaplain? And I'm in the South. And of course, in the South, I'm going to guess that he's a Southern Baptist, because a lot of Southern Baptists are Masons. And I said, what church do you go to? And he says, oh, I'm a Catholic. I'm like, what? You can't be a Catholic and a Mason, of course, you know. But see, it's just really interesting that in the real world, there's actually a Catholic Mason chaplain. And that's a really interesting amalgamation, to say the least, to see how that kind of bringing together. And so
there's the Order of the Pug, right? Have you heard of the Order of the Pug?
The Order of the Pug? No.
Yeah, just for a fun fact, there is a Catholic Masonic group, a paramasonic society founded by Roman Catholics called the Order of the Pug. And it's pretty important in Britain, but actually around the world. You've seen probably pictures of celebrities with the pug dog. And a big thing about that is often that they are of Roman Catholic descent, and they're allied somehow with Masonry. Robin Williams was a member of the Order of the Pug, for instance. Chester Benning or whatever from Linkin Park was a member of the Order of the Pug. So there's some, it's pretty, there are some, and they have a weird thing where you have to kiss the butt of a statue of a pug dog in their ritual. They're all weird, you know, they're weird groups of people that do their private rituals. But for the most part, that's only some of these groups. A lot of them are just trying to have fun. The historical thing of saving these rituals, and I see in the audience, by the way, we have Celestial Warrior, who's a Rosicrucian Mormon, and he was talking about some of the free speech going on in the comment Discord. I'm sorry, I don't have enough moderators. Somebody help me make sure that all the comments are clean in this, you know. But the Rosicrucians are really interesting, because a lot of the traditions that the Freemasons and the Scottish Rite have come from the Rosicrucians, right? Because if you're looking at this idea of Hermetic studies of more sciences from Kemet, from Africa, from, you know, the alchemy, then it comes back to Rosicrucianism. And there are a lot of Latter-day Saints involved with Rosicrucianism. I think it's pretty important, because we have to understand that out of Egypt concept of Judeo-Christianity, you know, that Moses is leaving Egypt. And from what we understand, this is the period of Akhenaten, right? So there's a cultural erasure that happens when we leave Egypt. And from that point on, we don't associate ourselves with Egypt anymore. But Egypt is where a lot of our civilization starts from, regardless of our understanding of where we are now. At some point, we used sciences and technologies and medicines that were associated with this idea of a separate soul, right? That there's a secondary soul and all these things. So there's a benefit, I think, to understanding those rituals. And also, rituals have twofold. One is to help you go through emotional changes, like watching a movie. Like, you have this moment and you react, you have that moment and you react, and it leads you through a system of understanding. A lot of people think that emotional understanding is like therapeutic for education, so they associate with that. But the other method of ritual is to change the world, right, with magic. And we're living in a world where people think this idea of seer stones and magic crystals is so new age, but here's, you know, a seer stone with a crystal quartz crystal in here, right? And I mean, these scrying mirrors are the modern use of technology. And if you read about how they work, it tells you they're running on servitors, which is a Gnostic term, that have daemons, right? And daemons are the names of the processes that are happening. So the entire thing is built up on Solomonic magic, right? Our entire technological world is. And I think that's where we start to see Masonry isn't just this like woo thing. It's how can, like, 32 degrees. 32 vertebrates. The connection to the spine, 33. Like these things are all, I mean, and if you read like Albert Pike, Morals and Dogma in the 19th century, and you look at the picture of the dude, he's this long-haired, bearded Kundalini yoga, and you're like, wow. So these dudes were all hippies, you know. He's writing books about the Veda, you know. He's really excited about India. So I think it's worth having a sympathetic look, and also remembering, let's say you're trying to learn, and it's 18, and there's just mud and poop in the streets, and it's dark at night. You know what I mean? Where are you going to go? There's no Ben Franklin library set up yet, unless the Hellfire Club builds it. So you join a men's lodge, and then in that men's lodge, you have access to books from all over the world. It'd be really hard to say that joining the Masons would be like, how could you not, up until like 70, 50 years ago, how could you not, and also consider yourself someone efforted towards a betterment of yourself and your community? So it's hard not to sympathize with that.
Oh, I think that's really interesting. You bring these insights to the table today. And I want to thank you so much for just taking the time to kind of chill. I think that our session we did, and again, I'll be releasing this. By the way, for those of you who are viewers of Andre's program, the name of my channel is Mormon Book Reviews. It is a YouTube channel. And I want to invite you to check out my channel. And actually, we do delve with some esoteric topics on my channel. I've had many Masons come on my program. I've had a Mason, and I'm going to have people talk about Freemasonry and Mormonism. I even had the former chief historian for NASA on my program to talk about Roswell. And Roger Launius, who's well-regarded historian and writer. And so I do actually delve with interesting esoteric topics as well. And so I love your AI generated stuff, by the way. I think it's so awesome. And just check out the channel. And for those of you who are listening on my side, now I'm a lot smaller. I want you to check out Andre's channel, because he integrates the idea of bringing into the idea of a kind of an esoteric reading of Mormonism, which you could argue that that's probably more in common with early Mormonism than a lot of people in the modern church would care to admit to. But there seemed to be a lot more exploration of different. There's like Lost Christian Civilization found in Michigan. That's yesterday's episode. I just like to have fun, and Andres likes to have fun with his channel, but also use it as a means of educating people. Now, people will go to me and say, "Well, why are you having this guy on?" I'm like, the 18 to 24-year-olds make up less than 2% of my audience. And I tell one of the goals of this channel is to make Mormon history and scholarship accessible to a lay audience. And I want to be able to reach the young people and spark their imaginations and get them to go on this journey of exploration to really go dig deeper and learn. And more importantly, become a whole person. And not somebody that's just sitting there in front of your screen, just mindlessly, just watching your life go by as you're watching these things, as this thing's entertaining you, but to be a participant in life as well. So Andres, I think you're definitely a participant in life. What would you say? Oh,
I was just thinking about that. I had this poster on my wall when I was a kid, and I think everyone needs this poster. And it was on my door, and it's actually kind of terrifying. It shows you your life in weeks, and it goes for what, 90 years, I think, just about. Let me see if I can find an example. Is this the cleaner copy of it? There you go. So, if you think about the life of a typical American, and this is, up to about 90 years, a lot of people, average life expectancy isn't 90 years. Women live longer, but you don't often get to 75 even, if you're lucky. And so look at how quickly, you're going through your early years, your elementary school, high school, and college. And then boom, this is this chunk. This is what most people spend from 23, 25 till they're in their 60s. They spend in this red chunk here, and it's often your career. Here's just about the time where people often divorce. Here's the average amount of time where someone leaves their job, or the average amount of time they spend in their job. I mean, this is how quickly your life goes by, right? And it just goes by in these boxes and weeks. And you can think about that and be afraid, but you could also use that to be kind of grateful. Like, you have kind of a map, you have kind of an idea, you have, maybe if I'm lucky and I'm trying to live my life to get to the future, I can get there. And I know, again, that sounds a little supernatural or woo, but it isn't. Like every day you have a chance to better yourself, to live longer, to help other people. It might not last forever. You know, that's the thing. I believe in immortality, but it doesn't have to happen. It could be that we're here for just this. That could be the case. I'm really lucky to have the perspective that I think that things can keep going, because it makes me more willing to live my day-to-day life. I think people get really overwhelmed when they worry that this is all that there is. But if this is all there is, then use it as well as you can. Don't just use it to hurt people. Don't just use it to to rest. Like, you do something with it. I think that's really what matters.
Yeah, and get along with people while we're all on this journey. And you're right, maybe this is it. And we got to grapple with that too. And I do grapple with that. So I tell people, it's like, you just don't know. We don't know. We all need, like my good friend John DeLynn gave me this term, we all could use epistemological humility. And I think
sometimes he says some stuff that's pretty smart. I like that.
Yeah, I think that's been a guiding principle. So that's a very interesting thing that he taught me. And so that's how I look at it too. And you know what? There are times when I push back on John DeLynn. Hey, you guys have been seeing the interviews I've done. I mean, I'm not afraid to push back on John and some of the stuff he does. And I think it's important that we do that, but we can do it in a respectful way. Yeah. Recognize that even our enemies, we still need to love them and pray for them and turn the other cheek. There's a lot of things that we can learn, principles we can learn from the church, the teachings of Jesus Christ. And Andres, I want to thank you because I really got to know you a lot better today. And I'm really excited about continuing our conversations.
Absolutely. I mean, we barely scratched the surface, but I love everything we talk about. There's just so much that so many places we can go from here.
So I will, at some point after this live stream, leave some stuff in the description, links for those of you who'd like to financially support the channel. And I will then probably release it sometime next week. Now, I wanted to do this as an introduction because sometime next week, I'm going to just plop this freaking time travel guy on us again when I was able to come on his program. And we kind of went like a stream of consciousness. We kind of got like into a lot of conspiracy stuff, speculative stuff. And from my understanding, Andres, your audience seemed to really like me. So I appreciate it. So I'm glad and honored that, I didn't know what I was getting into. Now, the one I went to you before and I said, now, dude, I only want you to play 30 seconds of the intro. But you know what, folks? I want you to do the full 2 minutes of the intro. And remember, the most important thing is remember all the voices of the restoration will be heard here on Mormon Book Reviews.
Take care.
Next up, call up, let's go saints. Guided by faith where the universe paints. So let's go saints and a